All right, church. So my name is Ben, and I have the honor of serving as the lead pastor here at Downtown Community Church. And that was the first time I've ever been introduced with, all right, have fun. I was like, is that... I don't know if that's ominous or like empowering. It's something. I guess we'll see in a couple minutes. Anyways, my name is Ben, and we're in a part, I think, 4 of a series called Signs, and it's been an interesting ride. And let me tell you why we decided to do this. One, because we just love studying the words of Jesus, what Jesus said, what Jesus did. But the Gospel of John is a little bit different of a book. If you've ever studied the Bible, then you know Old Testament, pre-Jesus, New Testament, Jesus and beyond, and Matthew, Mark, Luke are the first 3 letters, the first 3 accounts that we have of the life of Jesus, and they're all pretty similar. They have a similar form and structure. They're kind of informing one another in some ways, but John takes a totally different form than everybody else who writes, and he, in chapter 20, gives us basically his thesis statement, and in this thesis statement tells us why he wrote it, but also gives us kind of a clue, because the first 12 chapters, 21 chapters in total, first 12 span 3 years, chapters 13 through 21, basically the last 24 to 36 hours of Jesus' life. As John is wrapping this whole thing up, he gives us a clue both to the structure and to the purposes. This is what he says, John chapter 20, verse 30. He says, "Now Jesus did many other signs," and we said every week that it's significant, because John uses the word signs, not miracles. Many of them were miracles, or there would be a miracle attached to it, but more specifically, they were a thing that pointed to a thing. They were information that pointed to a destination. It was a sign, but as signs always do, signs are something, but signs point to something, a bigger, a different, a greater reality. And so what John is doing as he's writing this letter is saying, okay, here are 7 different signs. Chapters 2 through 12 are called the Book of Signs. Many scholars kind of refer to it. It's not titled that in the Bible. Where the structure of it is 7 different signs. And each sign has the miracle, the thing, but it also, again, has the deeper meaning attached to it. And every week we've kind of gone through both. And here's the reason I say that. Because this week, this miracle specifically, this sign specifically, there is so much to it that the miracle itself, the sign itself, pointed to a conversation that Jesus immediately after had. In fact, so much of the miracle of the sign that we're going to experience was actually a setup for the conversation. And so instead of going towards both of those, because it's the entire chapter of John chapter 5, I thought, I looked at how other people did it, and John Piper did this chapter in 6 weeks, and I'm like, there is no chance on God's green earth I can do this in 1. I am not nearly that good, so let's just do it in 2. And so today, what we're going to look at is the actual miracle and what happened, the sign itself. And then next week, we're going to point to this conversation that broke out between Jesus and some religious leaders, which most people will say was what the sign was setting up itself. Now, if you are thoroughly disinterested at this point and you kind of lost you, and you started counting how many lights do we have and all that stuff, then let me tell you what this actual sermon's about. Jesus, in ways that if we, I think, fully understood and grasped, Jesus waded so much into mess, in tense and difficult situations, that I think if we fully understood the level to which Jesus waded into messes and difficult and in just complex situations, frankly, by that I mean sinful, odd, hurting, broken, lonely, sometimes self-righteous situations, that I think honestly it would make us uncomfortable. Now, in John chapter 5, again, we're a little bit into this. And John picks up and says, okay, here's what was happening. He said, after this, there was a feast of Jews, and Jesus went up to Jerusalem. Now, I talked about this a little bit before, but where Jerusalem is at this point, there's this place called Samaria in between. He was in Galilee. He's going from Galilee. He's going to Jerusalem. And as he's going from one to the other, basically has to go around Samaria in order to get there. So it says, okay, so he was in Galilee. Now he's going towards Jerusalem where he's been before. And this is what happens when he shows up to Jerusalem, kind of the primary mecca of what was their religious thought and worship. Now there is in Jerusalem by the sheep gate a pool in Aramaic called Bethsaida, which has 5 roof colonnades. And in these days, there was a multitude of invalids, blind, lame, and paralyzed. Interestingly, if you have the ESV, the NIV, most of those kind of a little bit more modern translations, there is no verse 5, if you notice. If you have New King James or King James, there probably is a verse 5. They pull from different sources to create those texts, and it's a whole lesson that I don't have time for today, but simply to say this. What most people believe is that verse 5 explains the dynamic, but was a further addition to the text that was probably because someone wrote it in the margin, one of the scribes wrote it in the margin, and it was so helpful that they began to include it. And here's what that said, that there was a pool. And they didn't really have doctors, or if you had doctors, doctors were only basically for the sick, but interestingly too, the doctors would also be a group of people who, as you can imagine, they weren't well informed. In fact, there was a rule that if you were a doctor, you could not touch a dead body. So there's no way they could actually examine. So one of the things that they would do is if somebody was about to die, they would go and try to dissect the person while they're still living so that they could learn about the body. And so most people had superstition, and there's just one particular pool, and underneath this pool, what they later found through excavation was that this pool had 2 little things underneath it. It had one, the normal basin, but it actually had a natural spring, and what they believed would happen was that the natural spring would bubble up, the water would begin to bubble, there would be no wind that went around. Everyone would say, oh my gosh, there must be an angel that's stirring these waters, and the belief is the very first person down in this water would be healed. And that's going to be an important detail in the story. Because Jesus walks to this place where there is a multitude of people with all kinds of disabilities. Now, again, in their day, in our day, what we believe is that, obviously, every single person is made in the image of God. That we all have different disabilities, and some of us have specific, strategic, or not strategic, but just really difficult physical disabilities. Some of us have mental disabilities. Some of us have, you're like, I'm pretty sure my brother or sister has some emotional disabilities, right? We all have different stuff, right? But for them, when they saw someone with physical disability, they oftentimes thought that this was somebody who was cursed by God. And so Jesus walks into this place, and every commentary I read that I thought was just really insightful, it continually brought up this point, that Jesus to this point has had a wild trajectory of places that he's been. And if we read the Bible in sections, in a vacuum, we really don't get this. But really quickly, I want to trace back for us the progression that Jesus has been on in his ministry. Now, again, Jesus, very first thing, he doesn't do a miracle as his first miracle to think, okay, what am I going to do for my first miracle? Here's what I'm thinking about for my first miracle. I'm going to do this. No, Jesus shows up at a party with his mama, and his mama says, Jesus, this party has been fun, but they have run out of wine. Jesus, will you make more wine? Now, again, I don't know your first miracle if you're Jesus, but that's not mine. And in fact, I'll tell you this, I do know what mine would be. And I'm not trying to give Jesus notes, because he's Jesus, right? But you know what I would do? Just being strategic. I would feed 5,000 first. Get a buzz going. Everybody gets a little benefit, you know? Then, bam, I'm bringing somebody to life second. Right? Everybody's like, he fed, he did the ultimate. Now I'm just sprinkling in some like, okay, this person can see, this person can walk, this person could talk, this person is healed. Okay, now I'm feeding more people, another general miracle, right? And I'm kind of oscillating back and forth for maximum impact, both in the depth of power as well as the breadth of power and that strategy. But Jesus does this. Number one, he performs a miracle by when they had run out of wine, he turns water into wine. And not just water, about 120 to 180 gallons, which is approximately 600 to 900 bottles of wine after they'd finished all the wine. Son of God. Then he goes to the temple. We're like classic. He went to church. Goes to Jerusalem. You know what he does at Jerusalem? He sees everybody selling everything, and he gets the tables and he flips them over. He basically disrupts the entire temple system they had at the time. And said, this is a house of prayer, not a house of profit. Then he goes, and he walks through Samaria, and he talks to this woman at the well, this Samaritan woman, which was so significant, because as Jesus walked through that land, that was almost a forbidden land. And here's why. When people went from Galilee to Jerusalem, and Jerusalem to Galilee, right? Two primarily Jewish places, right? They would go around Samaria, and the reason they would is because it was so dangerous when they went through. They would continually get jumped, beaten, sometimes killed, and so they would avoid that area. But what does Jesus do? He walks straight through it. And the people in Samaria believed, just because they'd heard. And then he goes back to Galilee. Well, okay, of course he's going to his hometown. But it says, because he knew that a prophet was without honor in his hometown. And then he goes to Jerusalem again. And as he's going to Jerusalem again, he goes to the hospital, not the palace. So why do I say all this? It's simple. It's because if I was the Son of God, this would probably not be my progression. But this was Jesus' progression. First, I'm turning water to wine, which is kind of wild. Second, I'm going to church, but I'm flipping tables. Third, I'm going to talk to a group that has been so terrorizing our people that we don't even walk in their people's space, because this is, anytime we're in this space, basically a spot where we are setting ourselves to get hurt, killed, and I'm going to intentionally walk in there. And then on top of that, I'm going to go to a place that I don't have honor. And then on top of that, I'm going to go to a place where everybody thinks this is the place where people that have not been helped by God go. Do you know how much we keep Jesus from the mess and the difficult places because we don't think he actually wants to be there? Like most of us, we don't want Jesus. We want Jesus at the wedding, not at the reception. We want Jesus to not necessarily deal with money. We want Jesus to be very critical of people in the religious spaces that are too all about money, but we don't necessarily want to be critical of Jesus when and our stuff and our money. And we just sit there and say, okay, Jesus, I see this, but I don't want you to allow you into my mess because my mess is a financial mess and that's difficult. Or we say, Jesus, that's a particular space and that particular place to go to. Man, that's very messy. There's a ton of people. There's a ton of things. There's a ton of tension. There's a ton of sin that exists in this place. Interestingly, did you know that the exact place of Samaria and Jerusalem where Jesus experienced all this tension is the exact same place where the nation of Israel and Hamas is currently experiencing not the same, but a similar religious tension? Jesus walks into it. And then he goes to this pool. In other words, Jesus specifically walks into the mess. He specifically says, okay, this is a messy, this is a difficult, this is an unhonorable situation. I'm walking into this mess. And not only does he walk into the general mess, but he walks into a specific person's story. So he goes from the general right here, and he says, okay, generally I'm walking towards this place. But verse 5, one man specific who had been there, one man was there who had been an invalid for 38 years. 38 years he's been sitting there. He's been walking, he's been lying around. And when Jesus saw him lying there, he knew he had already been there a long time. So he, being Jesus, said to him, the man who was lying there, do you want to be healed? I feel like if I was this dude, I'd be like, what? Jesus, I know you're only about 31 at this point, maybe 30, maybe 29, maybe 32. Jesus, since before you were born, I have been coming to this pool. Do I want to be healed? What are you even asking? Do I want to be healed? Why do you think I'm here? Why do you think I showed up? Why do you think every single day, year after year, day after day, month after month, I show up? Since Christ was a corporal, as my grandfather would say, but before Christ was a corporal, right? Before Jesus was Jesus in bodily form, this man was shown up at this pool. And Jesus walks up and asks him, do you want to be healed? And I think what's so fascinating about that is this man had this infirmity for so long. And Jesus asked him a question that I think should be so clear and so obviously yes. But when I examine this to the experience of my life, man, this thing becomes cloudy. Do you want to be healed? Do you want to be healed? That's actually, I think, a beautiful question. Like, do you actually want to be healed? Every single one of us has something going on inside of us. Every single one of us has a place of brokenness. Every single one of us has a place of repetitive sin that we continually and cyclically go back to. Every single one of us has things inside of us that we know and we have historically struggled with. And in fact, for most of us, It's not a place of struggle, it's a place of capitulation. We say we struggle with it because it makes us feel good. We don't really struggle that much. So Jesus looked at him and says, hey, let me ask you a question. Do you want to be healed? This is just in my experience, but I have 3 reasons. Somewhat anecdotal. These are just my 3. There might be 5. There might be 10. These are just the things that I categorically saw and thought, you know what? In my experience, a lot of times we say we want to be healed. We don't actually want to be healed. And here's why. So these are my 3. Number 1 is this. We don't want to be healed because we have found our identity in our infirmity. We don't want to be healed because I found my identity in my infirmity. What I mean by that is, I've been so anxious for so long, I don't know who I am without my anxiety, and if I don't have my anxiety, I don't know if I'll actually be any good at my job, because what's actually driven me to be good at my job is my anxiety, and so I actually don't want to get rid of it, because that's kind of who I am. My identity is in my depression. Well, how does that work? Isn't that offensive? No, because there's a big difference between I have depression and I am depressed. I have anxiety and I am anxious. Those are statements of identity. That's saying I am this. And that's strong and powerful. I think sometimes we get so used to this, right? So used to this identity that we almost don't know who we are without it. We almost don't know who we are without this struggle. Like, I'm thinking about this guy, and for 38 years, he's been going to this pool over and over and over and over again. I wonder if when Jesus said, do you want to be made well? Do you want to be healed? I wonder if this guy thought, you know, I do, but what am I going to do next Tuesday? Because for 38 years, all I've done is gone down and hung out at this pool and hope something bubbled up and hope I can make it in, and I never make it in, but I'm hoping someday I can do this. And this is, in fact, this is where all my people are. This is where my community is. If I don't do this thing anymore, if I don't deal with this thing anymore, I don't even know that I have friends. The second one, it's similar, but it's different. Is that we are content in our condition. Content in our condition. So one is a little bit more identity-based. This is who I am. The other one is, it's not necessarily who I am, but I know the lift that it's going to take to be made well in this area, and I don't know that I'm particularly willing to do that lift. Pastor Craig Groeschel says this way. We will never change what we're willing to tolerate. We'll never change what we're willing to tolerate. Here's how I wrote it in my notes, because I thought, man, I want to make sure I'm clear on this. We will prefer the known comfort of our sickness to the unknown path and discomfort of being made well. We prefer the known comfort of our sickness to the unknown path and uncertainty of being made well. In other words, I know that God can heal my marriage. But man, it's going to take a lot of pain to get there. And there's going to be a lot of difficult conversations and a lot of difficult introspection. I am more comfortable holding on to my trauma than the discomfort of actually trying to deal with it. And not because this person deserves forgiveness, but because I do. But to go from here to there is to take this hurt and bring it really close, which is frankly really scary. By the way, you guys know I'm in therapy. I think it's the best thing ever. Besides Jesus, obviously, and my wife, and my, that kind of stuff. But it just makes me better at all that stuff, honestly. I've realized a self that I never knew needed to die. But the reason I bring that up in this is because it hurts and it's painful. And if there's something inside of you that when I say therapy is averse to it, That's the part that's more comfortable. In other words, why is it that when I say that, for some of you, your heart starts racing, like it did for mine for so long when I heard that? It's because we're more comfortable in our condition. Number 3 is this. That we're simply not, we don't feel like we're worthy of being made well. That I'm simply not worthy of being made well. This is, man, I think this is so many of us. It's not so much that I don't know that Jesus loves me. I think this is how we actually sift through it. Let me project onto you how I sift through this. My parents loved me both when they said, good job, you can have some ice cream, and when they said, you've done a bad job, you can go to timeout. They still both loved me. I just view as God perpetually loving me but seeing me in timeout. Not my child who I love, who I care about, who I'm proud of, who I see struggling for me, who I see wanting, who I see desiring. And so what we do then is we actually feel unlovable. And the thing that I think is really, really difficult and really, really intricate, and why I bring up these 3, is I think they're all actually related. I think what happens when we ask the question, do I actually want to be made well? Do I actually want to release the chains of unforgiveness because of hurt that I've experienced? Because you have experienced hurt. And the fact that you feel hurt means that there is a God. Because without God, there would be no sense of definitive moral right and wrong. But the fact that you feel that means that you feel like someone has treated you unjustly, and justice is the thumbprint of God on your heart. And in fact, God would say, you have been treated unjustly. This is an unjust world. I am doing something to make it right. And though it doesn't bring away that pain, there will come a day that I will wipe every tear. I will take away every sense of pain, hurt. And I want you to know that when you release this sense of forgiveness, when you say, okay, Jesus forgave me, I forgive you, it doesn't actually do anything to the other person. It does something inside of you. But what keeps me is I have an identity in my infirmity, which drives a sense of comfort in my condition. And ultimately, because I see my identity and my comfort in brokenness, what actually happens as a result of all those things is I actually just feel like I'm unlovable and unworthy of being made well. Maybe I'm the only one in here who's ever struggled with that. But Jesus looks at the man. Says, do you want to be made well? And what I love is this man's response. Because at this point, if you haven't read this, you're probably thinking, oh, he responds with this. He must respond with just this gem of wisdom. Here's what this guy says back. The sick man answered, Sir, I have no one to put me in the pool when the water is stirred up. While I'm going another step down, someone else walks before me. In other words, Jesus, I heard you say, do you want to be made well? But I'm just telling you right now, here's all the reasons I can't be made well. This man was not a person of extraordinary and extreme faith. This is a person who I don't think honestly even understood what Jesus was offering at this point. I think what he's saying is Jesus like, hey, do you want to be made well? He's like, yeah, I've tried dipping my toe in that pool before. And every single time I try, the problem is I don't have anybody to help me dip my toe in the pool. I got somebody to bring me here, not someone to help me get in there. And to be honest, Jesus, like, I just don't have any help to actually get there. Jesus is like, hold on. I think you're asking, this is the wrong question. This is the wrong thing that you're looking to. You're looking to this pool to get healed. Literally, you literally don't know that the healer's right next to you. You continually look into this pool, and you're wanting the healer to help you into this pool, not realizing that the healer is actually right here offering healing and help. This man was not a man of extraordinary faith. This man was somebody who Jesus walks into and says, man, I am going to do a work, and I want you to see me and see this. Why do I say that? What's interesting is Jesus next says to him, take up your bed and walk. In other words, I think there's a lot of us that when it actually comes down to this, when we think about the mess in our lives, we oftentimes don't want to be made well But what we do want when we want to be made well is to be made well in the well of the pool that we see, and we want the healer to help us to get into that pool, not just simply to heal us. In case that was thoroughly confusing, here's what I mean by that. We want to be a group of people, oftentimes, who say, okay, here's the problem with my relationship, here's the problem with my marriage, let's just say. Here's the problem with my marriage. And so Jesus, would you heal this? Maybe wives, and you're sitting there praying, Jesus, my marriage and its issues and my husband and all this kind of stuff. Would you heal this? God, for my husband, my wife, God, would you heal her? Is oftentimes what I'm praying. In other words, God, would you heal this? But here's how I want you to heal this. I want you to heal this by healing her, healing him, not actually healing me. And so I want you to help me by helping this, not actually by helping me with actually what's existing inside of my heart. Jesus, I need healing and help because I have tried over and over for years, and it just seems like no matter what I do, my financial situation is never better. And Jesus, I need healing in this place. What I'm saying is, Jesus, I need more dead presidents in my bank account. That will be healing. Bad stewardship is bad stewardship regardless. I'm not saying that you're a bad steward. You probably have incredible context in really difficult situations, and there's a bunch of different things, and it might be and it might not be, but here's what I do know, that the way that we ask for healing is not to say, okay, help me into the pool. It's just heal me, Jesus, whatever that means. And maybe that means help financially, or maybe that means actually the opposite. Because Jesus didn't call us innately to a life of health and wealth and wisdom. He says, come and die and find me. Give your life, and in that you'll find life. In other words, do we really want to be healed by Jesus? Or do we really just want to be helped into the pool of our own satisfaction? So Jesus looks at him and says, get up, walk. Man gets up, walks. They're introducing the tension point. So the Jews said to the man who had been healed, he says, it's the Sabbath. It's not lawful for you to take up your bed. But he answered, the man who healed me, that man said to me, take up your bed and walk. I like this because, to be really fair, Jesus asked him, do you want to be healed? He doesn't give her any reason. He didn't say yes. He just gives all the reason he can't be healed. Jesus says walk. He walks. So that's kind of some good, decent obedience. And then he goes to the people, and they're like, hey, why are you walking? Because there was this law on the Sabbath that you couldn't carry anything. It actually wasn't a law of the Sabbath. It was the tradition of the elders, which were additional laws that they had kind of as guardrails so that you wouldn't break them. People say there's 39 laws of the Sabbath. There's actually 39 categories of laws, one of which was you couldn't carry your anything, let alone your mat. And so Jesus heals this man, tells him to get up, walk, carry your mat. He walks, carries his mat. The religious leaders are saying, why are you carrying your mat? And he says, because Jesus told me to. In other words, it's very much like Adam and Eve. Like, why'd you eat that apple? That woman you gave told me to. Why'd you break the Sabbath? That Savior you gave told me to. I don't know. He's shifting blame in this whole thing. Now, the man who had been healed did not know who it was. For Jesus had withdrawn. I love that because Jesus is like, man, I'm going to do this and I'm going to back out. You're not even going to know who I am. But afterward, Jesus found him in the temple and said to him, see, you're well. He says, sin no more, that nothing worse may happen to you. And people get really geeked out about what in the world does Jesus mean. Here's what I think Jesus means. Think about it. This man, to this point, has not really shown a great amount of religious fervor. He showed up to a pool of superstition, saw the Savior right next to him, and asked him to help him into the pool, not to heal him. He gets up, people say, what's wrong? And he blames Jesus, and Jesus finds him later. Here's what I think Jesus is saying. He's saying, in essence, the meta of what Jesus is, I guess, displaying, what he's saying is connected to the entire narrative, which is that Jesus walks into the mess generally. He walks into the place of messy situations generally. 2, he walks into somebody's messy story specifically. Number 3, he heals this person. And number 4, he calls them to go and sin no more. That is the life of the Christian. That Jesus just not only walked into our world, he walked into our lives. That he healed us, he saved us, he restored us, and he calls us to go sin no more. I think here's what was happening. This man had experienced the work of God in his life, but had never actually realized who the healer was. And Jesus is saying, you better realize who I am, what I've done, and what I've called you to do, which is to go and sin no more. In other words, you want to know what's worse? You want to know what's worse? What's worse than being hurt and then being healed is being healed and not ever realizing who the healer is that's there to heal you. There is no doubt there are some of you that are in here that have experienced the healer, have experienced some healing, have experienced somewhat of the work of God, but are having such a difficult time seeing that he's the healer. There's a couple of different takeaways from this. And next week, we're going to launch into the religious, interesting things that happen with Jesus back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. But here's what I want to end today. A couple different parts of take home. Number one is this. If you're in here and you're a follower of Jesus, like you know Jesus, love Jesus, serve Jesus, you have given everything to Jesus. What's the areas of intentional darkness, mess, complexity that you're walking into? Who's the specific story of mess, complexity, and difficulty that you're walking into? Many of us would avoid the places that Jesus walked into, but Jesus walked into them day after day, and so are we called to. And I get it. This is complex, and it's messy. And you're thinking, man, if I wade in, I don't even know what to do. I don't even know what to say. Maybe. That's the point. Maybe for the first time you'll have to pray and have faith and trust God that he has called you to step into that place. So what's the messy place? What's the messy thing? What's the complex thing? What's the difficult thing, the difficult situation, the relationship, the thing at work, the thing with your family, the thing with your roommates, the thing with your fraternity, sorority, the thing with your kids, the thing with your parents, the thing, whoever it is. And the second one is this. It is very possible to be around the pool of healing and the people of healing, but never actually be healed. It's very possible to be around the pool of healing, the people of healing, experience some of the healing from the healer, but never actually know who the healer is themselves. And perhaps you've avoided the healer and the healing because we have an identity and because we're comfortable and because we feel unworthy. And let me just finish by saying this. Here is the beauty of Jesus. If you have ever felt that, you are exactly right. A lot of places it'll be like, no, you're good, you're fine, you're good, no, you're exactly right. You should feel unworthy of love because of your comfort and because of your identity, but can I just tell you, so should I. And so should every single person in this room. And to me, the problem perhaps is that you have been around a bunch of people who needed healing and none of them acted like they needed healing, and you actually felt like you were the only one who needed healing because the gospel clearly declares this, that we aren't good enough, that we aren't worthy of love. And that's the whole point, is that God so loved the world, not because the world was so lovable, but because we're not. That's literally the point, is that he would see it and say, yes, you aren't, but that's okay, you're still mine. I still love you. I still care for you. I still will give everything for you. I still want to redeem you. I am still yours. You are still mine. And I don't want you to think because of the mess and the complexity of your life that I don't love you. No, no, no. Because of the mess and the complexity of your life, I actually sent my son to die for you. So don't let that thing that you think is unlovable, which is the very thing my son came to love for, be the thing that keeps you from me, because that's why I came in the first place. The enemy declares your shame is unlovable. But the gospel declares nothing can separate us from the love of God. And so if you feel the enemy at the gates saying, don't let him in, if you feel the enemy at the gates saying, you're unlovable, know that you have a heavenly Father that so loves you, he gave everything. Not because we were worth everything, but because of the great love with which he loved us. And that is what's so amazing about grace and the love of God. If you've been around the pool, today's the day to meet the healer. If you've been around the pool, today's the day to say yes to healing. It doesn't mean it's going to happen like that, and it might be a long process. But you have a heavenly Father that so loves you, he gave his son for you, not just so that we could be forgiven, but so that we could be healed. Let's pray together. God, I pray for every single one of us who maybe we know the truth of our lives is that there's mess and it's complex. Jesus, we know the truth of our lives is that we are sinners. We have sinned. We have found our identity in our infirmity. We have become so comfortable in our condition. And many of us feel unworthy of being made well. But you came for that reason. I pray that healing would happen. Restoration would happen. Lives would be made whole. Forgiveness would break forward. Not because of the lack of the offense, but because of the lack of bitterness that you have called your children to carry. God, I pray for marriages, families, strained relationship between parents and kids and kids and parents and parents. Pray for the mess that somebody knows that somebody they know and somebody they care about is going through at work and they've just been hesitant to step into. I pray for the mess that somebody sees that somebody needs to love, needs to be befriended, needs to serve, and it's somebody that they're living with or somebody that they go to the gym with. I pray that every one of us would step into the messy and the complex places like you did, Jesus, and we would see your healing break forward. But Jesus, most of all, I pray that the answer would be yes. Yes. Do you want to be made well? Yes. And I want it to be through you, my healer, King Jesus. I have tried to dip my toe in this water over and over and over again, and it just never works out. And Jesus, at first I thought maybe you were here to help me dip my toe, but now I just know healing from you is totally different. You don't take people of what's temporary here on planet Earth and give us more of what we want necessarily on planet Earth. You take what's temporary and show us what eternity looks like and heal us with that in mind. And so, Jesus, we just say yes. Heal us. Yes, whatever it takes, we're in. But Jesus, we just want to know you, our healer. So I pray for every person in here who is thinking about this, just wrestling with it and not really sure. They feel unloved. They feel whatever it is, God, that you would just do a work in their life. They would know you through that. But Jesus, we would just simply say yes. Whatever it means, the answer is yes. Heal me. by your power and in your name, Jesus. Amen.